From the CyberHub bunker and studio, you're tuning in to the CyberHub Podcast. And now for your host and CISO, James Azar.
Good morning, security gang. Welcome to another episode of the CyberHub Podcast, Monday, March 24th, 2025. I am obviously not in my studio. I'm in Israel this week for CyberTech, part of the U.S. delegation here to Israel for this great event that I've been at many years, but I've never come as part of a delegation to Israel, like I've led delegations to Israel, never been part of one. It's kind of nice not to have to do any of the planning and just people tell you where to go, what to do, how to do it, and you don't have to do any of the background stuff. It's great. I'm not going to lie. But having said that, we've got a packed show this morning for all of y'all. Obviously, a lot to talk about, and there's a big time difference here. So, I feel like I'm kind of midday already, and while y'all are just starting your morning, because technically it's almost dinner time. Well, it's afternoon here. It's early afternoon. Dinner here is kind of late, depending on when you want to eat. But anyways, without further ado, I don't have my coffee cup right now. The reason I don't is because it's 3 p.m. in the afternoon. If I drink an espresso now, I likely will not go to sleep. And when I get back home, my body will be very off. So this week, you'll have to excuse me. I may not be drinking a coffee with all y'all this morning, but in my heart, in my mind, deep inside, I wish you all a coffee cup. Cheers. Let's get into this morning's show because we have a lot to talk about. So coffee cup cheers to all of y'all. Make sure to subscribe, follow, share, like, and comment. By the way, I'll be posting a lot of short videos, and those will only be exclusively available on our X account, Instagram only. So if you're not following us on X at CyberHub Podcast, and if you're not following us on Instagram at CyberHub Podcast, you want to make sure to do so now, because I'll be posting updates from the show, including bits and skippets of the panel I'll be on Wednesday. So you want to make sure to do that there. Let's get into this morning's show, and we've got something really important to talk about. So for those who don't know who Veeam is, and you may not know, and that's okay. You don't have to know every company that exists. Veeam does backup and replication. They're primarily one of the largest backup companies for enterprise businesses across the world. Well, they've identified a critical remote code execution vulnerability that's being tracked as CVE 2025-23120, and it's available only in their backup and replication software, and it impacts domain joint installations. The flaw was disclosed late last week and affects Veeam backup and replication version 12.3.0.310 and all earlier version 12 builds. The company fixed it with version 12.3.1, and that's build 12.3.1.1139er, which was released just a few days ago. According to the write-up by Watchtower Lab, who discovered the bug, it's a deserialization vulnerability in the Veeam.backup.ecxmanager.xml frameworks DS and Veeam.backup.core.backupsummary.net classes. The deserialization is when an application is improperly processes serialized data. It would allow attackers to inject malicious objects or gadget that could allow for the execution of harmful code. So you want to make sure you get this patched up early on this week so that you can mitigate this threat. You got to remember one thing. Threat actors, from the moment a CVE is announced, within 20 minutes will typically start to see massive scanning for said internet-facing vulnerability, trying to find who has it, where they have it. Within 24 hours, there's typically a exploit that's already available of how to take advantage of said CVE. So within 20 minutes of a CVE announcement, you'll start to see some heavy scanning. Within a day or two, you'll see an exploit, and you'll start to see kind of initial attacks at that specific CVE. So you want to make sure you address these types of CVEs really fast. And luckily with Veeam, as a former Veeam customer, I can tell you it's not very difficult to back up, and then it's not very difficult to do the patch, but you just want to make sure you schedule it with the business and that everyone understands that this has to be done ASAP, which again shouldn't be a problem. This is no different than having to patch your Microsoft Word or Adobe Acrobat. It's not as complex. So putting that out there, but Veeam is really important. It's part of your cyber resiliency. It's your backups in the event you go through an event because of something else happening in your environment. You want to make sure this environment isn't compromised at all so that you can continue to maintain business operations even while going through a cyber event of any sorts whatsoever. We'll continue with more light coming into play about the GitHub supply chain attack that we saw targeting GitHub Actions over the last week. So last week we talked about it extensively here on the show. What was going on at GitHub? Well, now thanks to folks over at Wiz and Palo Alto Unit 42, we have a little bit more information. So we've got two back-to-back stories that really address this. So let's start off with what we now know. So this attack coming to light last week was discovered that the code GitHub action named tj-action/changed-files, which is actively used by about 23,000 repos for tracking file and directory changes, was modified to execute a malicious script designed to dump some secrets and build logs. Wiz, recently acquired by Google, determined that based on lead researcher Adnan Khan, the root cause of the incident is an action made by ReviewDog, which provides code review tools. The action change uses an action called tj-actions/eslint changed-files, which in turn uses the ReviewDog action setup action. And it said that its code was modified after an attacker obtained a GitHub personal access token. Again, going through that, a personal access token is where it started. And then from there, it became a more targeted supply chain attack. And a lot of times these are happening to private developers whose projects are being used. So as a community, it's critical that we set some sort of standard, and GitHub tries to do its best, but then we as security professionals within our organizations can really work on helping to boost this up. ReviewDog launched an investigation after being notified by Wiz, and they determined that several of its actions were impacted and took steps to address that and prevent any future incidents, which gets us to what Unit 42 and Wiz have both said, that this attack was carefully planned. It began where malicious code was injected into the ReviewDog /action setup at V1 GitHub action. It's unclear how it occurred, but the threat actor modified the action to dump the CI/CD secrets and authentication tokens into GitHub. This was primarily done in order to try to compromise Coinbase. So this could have been a North Korean type of attack, or it could have been North Koreans potentially with some other threat actor groups that they are familiar with, or decentralized in nature, where the idea here was dump secrets in order to allow North Korea access to Coinbase, because traditionally when someone is going after crypto, we've known from history, and I'm not saying this is the case here, I'm just trying to connect dots of what we know. Episode 884 of the show, I still remember every single most of the stories we talked about over the last many years of doing the show. But I'll say that when you think of that, you go, North Korea is typically the person after crypto. So could have this been a joint type of attack where the initial access and kind of the backdoor was done by a part of a decentralized crime gang that was then sold to the North Koreans for part of the loot of potentially hacking Coinbase. So this did allow the threat actors to steal personal access tokens that was then used to push the malicious commit to the tj-actions/changed-files GitHub action that once dumped the CI/CD secrets to workflow logs. And again, the word we're going to have to transition to is that secrets should not be part of that code. They should constantly evolve. They should going through a persistent validation and verification within kind of some sort of short-based computing type of idea, because that's the only way to really stop these types of attacks from really enumerating in size at the supply chain of DevOps, which could be very common. The Medusa ransomware gang is using a malicious driver to disrupt and even delete some EDR products on some endpoints. According to new research from Elastic Security Labs, the malicious driver dubbed Avis Worker is deployed along with a Packer as a service called HeartCrypt to deliver the Medusa ransomware. Elastic noted that the driver was first documented in a ConnectWise post back in January involving a different campaign of some IT support scams that were used in Microsoft Teams. The Medusa ransomware, we've talked about them quite extensively here on the show. driver imitates a legitimate CrowdStrike Falcon driver and is using digital certificates from other company to masquerade as a legitimate program. So again, they're building they're building on this fake trust through certifications. And we use these certificates as kind of a blind trust, meaning if you have a certificate, you're coming from a good signed certificate within your dev cycle, then we trust it automatically. And that's going to have to change here as these attacks continue to evolve at the line of the types of SolarWinds attacks. So if you go back 5 years and we go to SolarWinds, we realize that getting at the code level and building these backdoors gave them a whole lot more access. And then what I mean gave them, I mean threat actors, a whole lot of access to environment. It allowed them to really enumerate their attacks and kind of pick the victims they wanted to go after, really go after their big fish first, and then let that escalate down. And now we're seeing that with GitHub action. And now even here with what we're seeing from Elastic and what essentially the Medusa operation looks like, very, very similar. They're doing code signing certificates, which are very effective for programs like ABIS Worker because these drivers have kernel access, and OSs like Windows will still allow some drivers, even with revoked certificates, to load because blocking them could negatively impact performance and cause a system to crash. So even though you could revoke the certificate here, you could still have impact to the system. And so the default Windows system operation is very similar to what we always say in cyber, which is you need to enable business. You've got to be able to work with the company. You can't shut something down. You've got to be able to willing to accept the risk and then go back and mitigate the loss if based on that risk specifically. And that's the case here. They're building on that attitude. And that's why this is part of a system that really is looking for disruption in the marketplace as well. And we continue with that, right? Because here you go. Criminals are abusing Microsoft's trusted signing platform to code sign malware executables with short-lived 3-day certificates. So the code signing certificates, again, blind signing. Saw that with Coinbase. We're seeing that with the Medusa ransomware. We saw that with GitHub, right? So they're going after these short-term code signing certificates here. This is the holy grail to obtain an extended validation code signing certificate because they gain increased trust from many cybersecurity programs due to the more rigorous verification program. However, the short-term ones are still trusted and they don't get blocked. So they're trying to abuse these in order for as a way to really get malware in our environments and bypass some of the security tools we spend a lot of money on in order to drive that forward. And these code signing types of events and the sophistication that goes beyond it and the trust is well identified. Malware sample signed by the Microsoft ID verified CSEOC CA01. The certificate's only valid for 3 days. While the certificate expires after 3 days, it still enables executables signed with it to still stay on for a long time. Remember, we just talked about it a minute ago. What ends up happening is even if it expired, you don't want to break a business process. You don't want your customer to get the blue screen of death. You don't want your customer to have any issues. So you still allow it to run for a period of time. And then you essentially revoke it. So while it's only 3 days, could really be in your system for months or even years in some cases. The platform itself is $9.99 monthly subscription designed to make it easy for developers to sign their executables while offering additional security. So cheap for the threat actors, trusted by us, and a great way to overcome our security tools. So to protect against this abuse, Microsoft is currently only allowing certificates to be issued under a company name if they've been in business for 3 years or more. My guess is that's going to change. A cybersecurity researcher and developer known as Squibbly Doo, sorry, I can't say that today, who's been tracking these malware campaigns for years, told Bleeping Computer that the threat actors are switching to Microsoft service simply out of convenience. So you have that there. The CERT in Ukraine is warning against a series of targeted cyber attacks aimed at employees of Ukraine's defense industrial complex and members of their armed forces. These attacks are being tracked under the identifier UAC0200 and its espionage concerning the Darkcrystal RAT. According to the Ukraine CERT, this has been ongoing since at least the summer of 2024. It employs sophisticated tactics to gain unauthorized access to sensitive information. One of the primary techniques identified involves the use of signal messaging app. We talked about this later, and now we're getting more information of how the Darkcrystal RAT works. It's a remote access tool that would allow criminals to infect systems from a distance and then grant them complete control over the victim's device, allowing them to exfiltrate sensitive information, manipulate data, and even deploy additional malicious payloads, which essentially lets them take over the entire phone there. So something to understand what the Ukrainians are going through. The Virginia Attorney General's office is now being it's cloak ransomware gangs actually claiming the cyber attack on disrupting the Virginia Attorney General office system. The incident became public back in February. We talked about it here on the show. We now know that the cloak ransomware gang added the Virginia AGO to its Tor-based leak site, making the data allegedly stolen from its systems available for download, meaning they failed to extort. The Virginia Attorney General office decided, we ain't paying, son, and said, we're dropping it. So there's that there as well. A very interesting article in the Wall Street Journal by a gentleman by the name of Scott Shackelford, who's a professor of business law and ethics at Indiana University's Skelly Schools of Business, and he's the executive director of the Ostrom Workshop and Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research. This talks about the need to reform cybersecurity policy, saying we're spending a lot of money, but really the results have not changed, and he wants the government to get more assertive. Now, I've never met Scott, don't know who Scott is, the professor. There's some stuff I agree with what he says here. There's stuff I disagree with. More agency coordination, 100% agree. There needs to be more agency coordination around cybersecurity. I've said my opinion on this before. I think CISA should take the lead on coordinating everything cybersecurity in the federal government and leave it at that. The FTC, the FCC, anyone that wants to regulate or do anything should have to go through CISA and let CISA run it. That's one. Federal reporting requirements, 50 different. There's a federal data breach notification law that's literally sitting on the shelf that's waiting to be voted on. So what I would say is pass it. Just get it to the floor, let them vote to pass it. Right now, they're not passing it. Look, this bill was written back in 2020, right? So it could have passed in 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, maybe 2025 will be the year. All right. And it should and I think one of the things that they should edit this bill on is that it should override the SEC's reporting requirements. So just saying that there. But yeah, we should have to only report to one body and then let that body deal with the rest of it. Federal cybersecurity standards, also agree with that. Pick a framework for cyber standards and make that the bare minimum if you're in critical infrastructure, right? Critical infrastructure involves 17 or 16 different industries like energy, healthcare, finance, and so forth. Say we take the CIS top 20. That's your base requirement for cybersecurity standards. You've got to meet the CIS top 20. You got to show us that you're actually deploying the CIS top 20. It's good blocking and tackling, and it's better than any other framework out there. NIST is a governance framework, so those that are going to write NIST in the comments, I'm not going to see them right now because I'm on one screen. I'm not in the studio, but I will tell you, not there, right? More accountability. I'm going to disagree here a little bit. I don't think we need more accountability. Cybersecurity is a business enabler. It's not a business disruptive. And this is, professor writing this. You can tell a professor's writing this. They want more accountability. Well, he wants to hold tech companies accountable for security flaws in their product. No one who's ever built a product would say this. You're inherently going to launch products with security flaws. Ideally, what you want to do is as you grow your business, you go back and you do these reviews, you identify, you have bug bounty programs, you do a lot of these different things to help you build a product. I am personally against holding companies accountable for putting security flaws into products because they can't control it. And I don't care what you do. And if no matter what security tools you put in there, an attacker has to be right 1% of the time. You have to be right 99% of the time. So the statistics are against you, and there's always going to be a vulnerability somewhere. I think the accountability should be at the fact that, one, companies should be given the held to a standard in terms of patching their devices. Now, if a company launches a product with multiple security flaws, maybe like Avanti, then I could see that, one time will, strike one, that's fine. But if you're always hitting base hits and your products are good, I don't know that that's the accountability I want. If there's negligence and completely ignoring security standards, I think that's a different place where we can have that types of accountability. And obviously workforce investment. We have so much workforce investment. We don't need any more. There's so many boot camps, so many colleges. Disagree. What we need to do is get cybersecurity involved in the early on in education, and not just at the college level. It should be in elementary school, middle school, and high school. It should be part of a more based curriculum for our students in order to one, help address cyber awareness and also build the skills to go into cybersecurity as well. AI is now settling a class action privacy lawsuit that's worth over an estimated of $50 million. The federal judge is approving a proposed settlement between Clearview AI and some of these class action plaintiffs. The Judge Sharon Johnson Coleman is estimating the damage to be over $50 million, which Clearview AI cannot pay. It looks like this is going to be one of those where the class action defendants will have some stake in the company for some time. So we'll see if that actually does work. That's it for our show this morning. We've got a bit over here, but again, one screen, I'm not seeing the time, so I kept going. But we'll be back tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern, live with all the latest and greatest. Again, in Israel this week. So if you're in town, if you're here for CyberTech, you see me, come by, say hello. Would love to meet all of y'all. Until then, have a great rest of your day. And most importantly, stay cyber safe.
We love feedback, so make sure to connect with us on social media and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast listening platform.